Origins of Destruction, Part 2. Chapter 1. The Desolation of Scotland. The coast of Scotland, once a rugged and vibrant landscape teeming with life, now lay barren and desolate under a shroud of darkness. The villages, once filled with the sounds of bustling markets and the laughter of children, were silent. The fields, once ripe with crops, were now withered and dead, their lifeblood drained by the relentless hunger of the master. The air was thick with the stench of death, the once fresh sea breeze now tainted by the decay of countless bodies. Everywhere the master had set foot, he had left behind a wasteland. Not a single soul remained. Every man, woman, and child had been drained of their life force, their blood the fuel that stoked the fires of his unending power. Even the animals had not been spared. The livestock lay rotting in the fields, their blood spilled to sat the master's insatiable thirst. The once green hills and fertile valleys were now a grim testament to the devastation he had wrought. The darkness that clung to the land was more than just the absence of light. It was a palpable, suffocating presence, the very essence of the master's being. Nocturna's influence hung heavy in the air, a reminder that the master was no longer a mere mortal, but a creature of pure destruction, driven by an all-consuming need to feed. As he moved along the deserted coast, the master felt his strength growing with each passing moment. The blood he had consumed fueled his power, but it was not enough. He needed more, and his thoughts turned to the lands across the sea, where the Norsemen, the Vikings, awaited. They were the warriors who had once bested him as a man, and now, as an elder, he would exact his vengeance upon them. In preparation for his journey, the master found one of the Viking longships that had been left behind, its crew slaughtered by his own hand. The ship, once a proud vessel of war, now served a darker purpose. The master inspected it with a cold, calculating eye, ensuring that it would carry him across the treacherous waters to his next conquest. As he prepared the ship, the master called out to Nocturna, the god of the elders, seeking guidance for the journey ahead. "Guide me, my lord," he intoned, his voice a low, reverent growl. "Show me the way across the dark seas, so that I may bring your wrath upon the Norsemen." The air around him thickened, and the darkness deepened as Nocturna's presence made itself known. A chilling wind blew from the north, ruffling the master's cloak and filling the sails of the longship with an unnatural force. The sea, once calm, began to churn with dark, swirling currents, as if responding to the will of the elder god. With everything in place, the master cast off into the night, the longship gliding silently across the inky black waters. There was no moon to guide him, no stars to light his path, but he needed no such guidance. His sense of bloodlust and the influence of Nocturna were all he required. The scent of the Norsemen's blood called to him like a siren song, pulling him ever closer to his destination. As the ship moved further from the desolate shores of Scotland, the master stood at the prow, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The darkness embraced him, wrapped around him like a lover, and he felt the power within him growing, pulsing with the promise of the blood that awaited him on the other side of the sea. The journey was long, but the master did not tire. He was fueled by a singular purpose, his mind filled with visions of the slaughter to come. The Vikings had been fierce adversaries in his mortal life, but now, as an elder, he would show them the true meaning of terror. The longship cut through the water like a blade, driven by the master's will and the dark currents of Nocturna. The night was endless, the sea stretching out before him like a void, but he was not afraid. He welcomed the darkness, embraced it as part of himself, knowing that it was his ally, his weapon, his destiny. And so, the master sailed on, leaving behind the desolation of Scotland and heading toward the land of the Norsemen, where his vengeance would be unleashed in a storm of blood and death. The world would soon know the true power of the Master, and Nocturna's champion would reign supreme. The Master's arrival in North Way. After weeks of sailing across a dark and unforgiving sea, the Master finally arrived on the shores of a land known as North Way, a cold and cruel place where the wind howled with a mournful wail and the mountains loomed like sentinels of death. The icy waters crashed against the rocky coast as the longship came to a halt, its journey guided by the dark currents of Nocturna. The Master stepped onto the frozen shore, his boots crunching on the frost-covered rocks. The long voyage had left him with a deep, gnawing hunger, a hunger that could only be sated by the warmth of fresh blood. His senses, sharpened by his transformation, quickly detected the presence of life nearby. He could feel the pulse of blood, warm and inviting, just beyond the rugged coastline. Drawn by this irresistible call, the Master moved inland, his cloak billowing behind him like a shadow. The air was bitterly cold, but he did not feel it. The icy winds and harsh environment were nothing to him now. His body was driven by a single, insatiable purpose. It wasn't long before he came upon a small coastal town nestled against the rocky cliffs. The townspeople, hardy fishermen and their families, were going about their lives, unaware of the darkness that had descended upon them. The Master approached the town with an almost casual stride, his presence masked by the gathering twilight. Without hesitation, the Master descended upon the town, his movements swift and lethal. He cut through the fishermen with ease, his strength far beyond anything they could have imagined. His fangs found their mark again and again, draining the life from each victim with terrifying efficiency. The screams of the dying echoed through the streets, but no one could stop the onslaught. The Master's attacks were merciless. He cared nothing for the lives he was taking. To him, these people were nothing more than a means to satisfy his relentless thirst. He moved through the town like a dark wind, leaving behind only death and destruction. When the last townsperson fell, the Master stood amidst the carnage, his eyes glowing with a dark satisfaction. The blood he had consumed revived him, filling his veins with renewed strength. Yet, despite the temporary satisfaction, the hunger within him was never truly sated. It was a constant, gnawing presence, always demanding more. Driven by this endless need, the Master turned his gaze inland. The cold, harsh landscape stretched out before him, dotted with small villages and settlements. He knew that these people would be no more than a brief respite, a momentary indulgence in his quest for blood. As the Master moved further into the land of North Way, he left a trail of death in his wake. Every village he encountered was drained of life, the inhabitants falling before him like wheat before the scythe. He was a force of nature, unstoppable and unrelenting, his thirst for blood driving him ever onward. Word of the terror began to spread like wildfire through the land. Tales of a creature, a demon that killed without provocation, began to circulate among the people of North Way. They spoke of a being with eyes that glowed like embers in the night, a creature that moved through the shadows and left only death in its wake. Fear gripped the hearts of the people, and many fled their homes, seeking refuge in the mountains or the dense forests. But there was no escape. The Master was relentless in his pursuit, guided by a bloodlust that knew no bounds. He cared nothing for the lives he took, only for the satisfaction of the kill, the brief moment of relief that came with each drop of blood. The land of North Way, once cold and cruel, had become a place of unspeakable horror. The people lived in constant fear, knowing that at any moment the Master might descend upon them, bringing death and destruction. And as the terror spread, so too did the legend of the Master, a creature of darkness, born from the blood of the fallen and destined to leave a trail of bodies in his wake. For the Master, the journey was far from over. The land of Northway was only the beginning. His hunger would drive him onward, pushing him to seek out new victims, new sources of blood. And as long as the darkness within him remained, the Master would continue his reign of terror, unstoppable and insatiable. The gathering storm. News of the relentless slaughter reached the great hall of the most powerful warriors in the land, an imposing structure of wood and stone perched on a hill overlooking the icy fjords of Northway. The hall was a place of legend where only the bravest and strongest of the Norsemen gathered. Inside, the flickering light of torches cast long shadows on the walls, where trophies of countless battles hung, each a testament to the victories of the warriors who called this place home. The hall was a place of honor, where the leaders of the Viking clans, men who had never known defeat, met to plan their conquests and celebrate their gods. Their leader, a towering figure with a mane of silver hair and a gaze like steel, sat at the head of the great table. His name was Jarl Sigurd, a warrior of unmatched skill and cunning, known for his unyielding resolve and his unbreakable spirit. Around him sat his most trusted warriors, men who had proven their worth in battle time and time again. When word of the creature's rampage reached the hall, a hush fell over the room. The tales spoke of a demon that had descended upon the land, draining the life from entire villages, leaving behind nothing but empty husks. The horror of the stories sent a chill through even the most hardened warriors, but fear was not something these men allowed to rule them. For the Norsemen, fear was a challenge to be met head-on, a test of their courage and their worthiness in the eyes of the gods. Jarl Sigurd rose from his seat, his voice a deep, commanding presence in the hall. "This creature has brought fear to our land," he said, his eyes sweeping over the gathered warriors. "It has slaughtered our people, drained them of their life, and left nothing but death in its wake. We cannot allow this to continue. We are the sons of Odin, the warriors of Valhalla. We will face this demon, and we will destroy it." The warriors roared in agreement, their voices echoing through the hall. These were men who had faced death on countless battlefields, who sought every opportunity to prove their worth to their gods. To them, the chance to face such a creature was not just a duty, it was an honor. A large group of the fiercest warriors in the land prepared for battle. They donned their armor, a mix of iron and leather, each piece worn and scarred from years of combat. They strapped on their swords and axes, weapons that had tasted the blood of many enemies. As they readied themselves, their minds were focused on the task ahead. They would find this creature, and they would bring it down or die trying. The journey to the latest site of the Master's destruction was long and arduous. The cold winds bit at their faces, and the frozen ground crunched beneath their boots. But these men were used to the harshness of their land, and they pressed on, driven by the need to confront the terror that had taken hold of their people. When they reached the town that had been attacked by the Master, even these battle-hardened warriors were shocked by what they found. The scene was one of utter devastation. Bodies lay scattered across the ground, drained of life and left like discarded meat. The air was thick with the stench of death, and the silence was deafening. The warriors moved through the town, their footsteps echoing in the empty streets. They searched every house, every corner, but there was no sign of the creature. The horror of what they saw weighed heavily on them. This was not the work of a man, nor even a beast. This was something far more sinister, something beyond their understanding. As they searched, a growing unease settled over the group. They had faced many dangers before, but this was different. This was a force of death and destruction, unlike anything they had encountered. The lifeless bodies, drained of all vitality, seemed to mock their strength, reminding them of their own mortality. After a long and fruitless search, the warriors gathered in the town square. The decision was made to return to their fortress, to regroup and plan their next move. But as they prepared to leave, many of them could not shake the fear for their families back in their villages. What if the creature struck there next? What if, even now, it was moving closer to their homes, to the people they had sworn to protect? The march back to the fortress was somber. The warriors, normally so confident and bold, were weighed down by the knowledge of what they had seen. They knew they were facing something beyond the realm of men, something that threatened not just their lives, but the very soul of their land. As the warriors made their way back, the fortress loomed on the horizon, its dark silhouette outlined against the night sky. Inside, the great hall was quiet, the fires burning low as the families of the warriors slept, unaware of the danger that lurked just beyond the walls. High above, perched on a cliff overlooking the fortress, the master watched with cold, calculating eyes. He had followed the warriors, unseen, through the shadows. He had watched as they discovered the remnants of his work, and he had seen the fear that had taken hold of them. Now, as the fortress stood dark and silent, the master felt the gnawing hunger rise within him once more. The warriors were on their way back, but they would be too late. The families, the children, the elders, they were unprotected, unaware. They were his for the taking. The master smiled, his fangs glinting in the pale moonlight. He would strike, and when he did, the fortress would fall, just as every village and town before it had. The people of Northway would know true terror, and the legend of the master would grow. As the warriors marched through the night, the master loomed over their fortress like a dark spectre, ready to unleash his fury upon the unsuspecting families within. The night was his, and the hunt was about to begin. The warriors saw the light of their fortress flickering in the distance, a beacon of safety and home. A collective breath of relief passed through them as they quickened their pace, eager to embrace their loved ones and celebrate their return. The fear and unease that had haunted them during the march back seemed to melt away as the familiar walls of the fortress came into view. But as they crossed the threshold and entered the fortress, the sight that greeted them was one of unspeakable horror. The air was thick with the stench of death, and the fires that burned in the great hall cast an eerie, flickering light over the scene of destruction. Bodies lay strewn across the courtyard, drained of life, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. The warriors, who had been left to guard the fortress, men whom Jarl Sigurd had trusted as his strongest fighters, lay among the dead, their bloodless corpses a grim testament to the power of the creature that had come before. The warriors froze, their relief turning to despair as they took in the devastation. The fortress, once a place of strength and security, had been transformed into a slaughterhouse. Everywhere they looked, they saw the lifeless bodies of their loved ones, wives, children, elders, all cut down and drained like cattle. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint crackling of the fires and the distant howl of the wind. One by one, the warriors began to break down, their stoic facades crumbling as the reality of what had happened set in. Some fell to their knees, tears streaming down their faces as they clutched the bodies of their fallen kin. Others stood frozen in shock, unable to comprehend the horror that had unfolded in their absence. The strongest among them, men who had faced death on countless battlefields, now found themselves helpless in the face of such overwhelming loss. Jarl Sigurd, his face ashen, surveyed the scene with a heavy heart. He had led his men to protect their land, to face the terror that had gripped their people but now he stood in the ruins of his home, surrounded by the bodies of those he had sworn to protect. The weight of his failure pressed down on him like a leaden shroud. One of the warriors, his voice choked with emotion, turned to the Jarl and asked, "How do we fight a creature such as this? How can we hope to defeat something so powerful, so merciless?" Jarl Sigurd's gaze hardened as he looked out over the devastation. He knew that this was no ordinary foe, and that conventional tactics would not suffice against such a being. His mind raced as he searched for a solution, for something, anything, that could turn the tide in their favor. Finally he spoke, his voice low and filled with resolve. "There is an old legend, one that speaks of a curse, the Volsung's curse. It is said that 2 brothers, who live 2 days' ride from here, possess the pelts of a dire wolf. These pelts grant them the ability to transform into ferocious beasts, creatures of unparalleled strength and savagery. To counter this monster, we need a beast of our own." The warriors listened intently, their despair momentarily replaced by a glimmer of hope. They had heard tales of the Volsung brothers, legendary warriors who had been cursed to live as wolves, but whose power in battle was unmatched. If there was any chance of defeating the creature that had brought such destruction, it might lie with these cursed men. "The brothers are named Sigmund and Sinfjotli," the Jarl continued. "They are the only ones who might be able to stand against this abomination. We must bring them here, and we must do so quickly, before the creature strikes again." Jarl Sigurd turned to one of his most trusted warriors, a man named Bjorn, known for his loyalty and bravery. "Bjorn," he said, placing a hand on the warrior's shoulder, "you are the fastest and most skilled of my men. I trust you with this task. Ride out now, find the Volsung brothers, and bring them back to the fortress. Tell them of what has happened here, and that we need their help if we are to have any hope of survival." Bjorn nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of the mission. Without another word, he mounted his horse and spurred it into a gallop, racing out of the fortress and into the night. His heart was heavy with the loss of his comrades and the weight of the responsibility that had been placed upon him, but he knew there was no time to waste. The lives of the remaining warriors, and perhaps the entire land, depended on his success. As the sound of Bjorn's horse faded into the distance, Jarl Sigurd turned back to his men. "Prepare the fortress," he commanded, his voice strong despite the sorrow that gripped him. "We must be ready for whatever comes next. This creature has taken much from us, but we will not let it take everything. We will fight, and we will make our stand here." But even as he spoke, the Jarl could not shake the feeling of dread that had settled over him like a dark cloud. The master, the creature that had brought such devastation, was still out there, somewhere in the shadows, watching, waiting, and with every passing moment, the danger grew closer. High above, hidden among the craggy cliffs that overlooked the fortress, the master loomed like a dark spectre. He had watched the warriors return, seen their despair as they discovered the aftermath of his wrath. He could feel their fear, their anguish, and it only fueled the hunger that gnawed at him from within. The fortress, now emptied of its families, lay vulnerable before him. The warriors who remained were strong, but they were few in number, and they were not prepared for the horror that would soon descend upon them. The master smiled, his fangs glinting in the pale moonlight. He would strike again, and this time he would leave nothing but ashes and blood. As Bjorn rode through the night, racing towards the Volsung brothers, the master prepared to unleash his fury upon the fortress and the unprotected families who had fallen into his grasp. The night was his, and the hunt was about to begin anew. The call of the wolves. Bjorn rode like the wind, his heart pounding in his chest as he urged his horse onward. He only stopped when absolutely necessary to rest and feed his steed before continuing his relentless journey. Time was of the essence, and he knew the fate of his people hung in the balance. Finally, after 2 grueling days, he reached a clearing deep in the woods, where a small, unassuming shack stood alone, exactly where Jarl Sigurd had said it would be. Bjorn leapt from his horse and rushed toward the house, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Sigmund! Sinfjotli!" he called out, his voice echoing through the trees, but there was no answer, only the eerie silence of the forest. He pushed open the door of the small shack, peering inside, but it was empty. Panic began to claw at him. Had he arrived too late? As he turned to leave, Bjorn suddenly froze. 2 figures stood behind him, their swords drawn, eyes cold and piercing. The brothers, Sigmund and Sinfjotli, had appeared out of nowhere, their presence as intimidating as their reputation. "Speak quickly, intruder," Sinfjotli growled, his voice low and threatening. "Or feel the coldness of our steel." Bjorn raised his hands in a gesture of peace, his voice trembling slightly as he spoke. "Please, I am no enemy. I come at the request of Jarl Sigurd. Our fortress has been attacked by a creature of unimaginable power. A demon that drains the life from its victims. We need your help. The Jarl himself has called for you, and he has need of the wolves." Sigmund's eyes narrowed as he listened, his grip on his sword tightening. "And why should we help you?" he asked, his tone distrustful. "What does this have to do with us?" Bjorn swallowed hard, his mind racing. "This creature, it has slaughtered our people, drained them of their blood. Even the Jarl's strongest warriors have fallen. I fear we may already be too late, but the Jarl believes you 2 are the only ones who can stand against it. I rode for 2 days to find you. Please, we need you." For a moment, the brothers exchanged a silent look, their expressions unreadable. Then, without a word, they sheathed their swords and stepped back. "It took you 2 days to reach us," Sigmund said, his voice calm. "But it will take us but a day to return." Before Bjorn could react, the brothers moved to the side of the shack, where 2 large dark pelts were draped over a wooden rack. They threw the pelts over their shoulders, and as soon as the coarse fur touched their skin, their bodies began to contort and change. Bones cracked and shifted, muscles expanded and tightened, and their faces elongated into snarling muzzles. Within moments, the 2 brothers were no longer men, but werewolves, beasts born of savagery and ancient curses. Their transformation complete, the werewolves turned their glowing eyes toward Bjorn, who stared in awe and fear. Sinfjotli let out a low growl, and without a moment's hesitation, they sprang forward, their powerful legs propelling them into the forest at a speed that no human could match. They were a blur of fur and fangs, racing toward the fortress, their senses guiding them to the source of the threat. Back at the fortress, the scene was one of utter devastation. The fires that had once burned brightly in the great hall were now reduced to smouldering embers, casting eerie shadows across the blood-soaked ground. The air was thick with the stench of death, the silence broken only by the occasional crackle of dying flames. In the center of the hall, Jarl Sigurd's body lay crumpled on the cold stone floor, his eyes wide open in a final, frozen expression of horror. His once proud figure, the embodiment of Viking strength and honor, was now nothing more than a lifeless husk, drained completely of blood. Around him lay the bodies of his remaining warriors, men who had fought valiantly to the end, but had been no match for the creature that had descended upon them. The master stood amidst the carnage, his dark eyes gleaming with satisfaction. He had made short work of these warriors, tearing through them with the ease of a predator among prey. None had remained standing, and now their lifeless forms were scattered across the hall like discarded dolls. He looked down at the Jarl's body, a twisted smile playing across his lips. "Though you bested me in life," the master whispered, his voice dripping with malice, "now you are no more than a meal to me, like sheep culled by your shepherd." He stepped over the bodies, his hunger momentarily sated, but the gnawing void inside him never truly disappeared. The blood of these warriors had given him strength, had fueled the dark power that coursed through his veins, but it was never enough. It would never be enough. The master moved toward the entrance of the great hall, his cloak billowing behind him like a shadow. He could sense something approaching, something fierce and powerful, but he felt no fear. The werewolves might be creatures of legend, but they were no match for him. He would destroy them, just as he had destroyed everything else in his path. As the master prepared for the coming confrontation, Bjorn, still riding hard, prayed silently to the gods for the brothers to reach the fortress in time. The creature that had brought such devastation was unlike anything they had ever faced, and if the Volsung brothers could not stop it, then all hope was lost. But the master was not concerned with hope, nor with the prayers of men. He was a creature of darkness, driven by an insatiable hunger and a desire for destruction. And as the night grew darker and the shadows lengthened, he waited, ready to unleash his fury once more. The Battle of Beasts. The master stood in the shadows of the ruined fortress, his senses heightened, his anticipation building as he felt something powerful approaching. The thrill of impending battle surged through him, a craving he had not felt in centuries. He welcomed it, relished it. For too long, he had been unmatched, a predator without an equal. Now, as he waited in the darkness, he knew that this would be different. He could feel it in the air, the tension crackling like a storm about to break. A day passed, and then the two brothers arrived at the fortress, their forms hulking and monstrous. As werewolves, they stood on two legs, muscular and fierce, their eyes glowing with a primal ferocity. They had once been men, but now they were beasts. Terrifying, savage creatures who had embraced the curse of the Volsungs. As they surveyed the carnage left behind by the master, even their hardened hearts were shocked by the devastation. Bodies lay scattered like leaves in a storm, drained of life, the fortress itself a tomb of death. The brothers growled low in their throats, the sight igniting a rage deep within them. They could sense the power of the one who had done this, a power that now lurked in the shadows, watching them. The master, hidden in the darkness, observed the brothers with a cold curiosity. He could feel their strength, their primal energy radiating through the air. These were no ordinary foes. They were something else, something ancient and powerful. A wicked smile curled on his lips as he slipped out of the shadows, revealing himself to the werewolves. The brothers turned to face him, their eyes blazing with a mix of anger and curiosity. They had heard tales of this creature, this vampire who drained entire villages of life, but now they stood before him, and they could feel the malevolence that radiated from him like a dark aura. "I have never tasted the blood of a creature such as you," the master said, his voice dripping with anticipation. "I will enjoy this new menu." Without warning, the master charged at the brothers, moving with a speed that had overwhelmed countless enemies before, but these were no ordinary foes. In a blur of motion, the brothers dodged his attack, their werewolf forms matching his speed, something no one had ever done before. The master spun around, his eyes narrowing in surprise. These creatures were different. Fast, agile and clearly capable of more than he had anticipated. Before he could react, one of the brothers lunged at him, their massive claws raking across his flesh. The master felt pain, a sharp, searing sensation that coursed through his body. It was a feeling he had not known since becoming an elder. He had been struck before, but never had he felt this. Caught off guard, the second brother closed in, his fangs bared as he sank them into the master's side, tearing flesh from his body. The master winced in agony. The pain from these creatures, unlike anything he had ever experienced. His body, normally impervious to harm, was now vulnerable to the savage strength of the werewolves. The battle raged on, but the master found himself struggling. The brothers fought with a ferocity that matched his own, their movements fluid and coordinated, as if they were of one mind. Each time he struck, they were there, a step ahead, countering his every move. The master felt the unfamiliar sensation of defeat creeping over him, a realization that he had met his match. But he would not stop. He would fight until death, if that was what it took. His fury drove him on, his attacks becoming more desperate, more vicious. Yet the werewolves seemed to anticipate his every move, their claws and fangs finding their mark again and again. As the pain overwhelmed him, the master felt a pull at his very core, a voice that echoed in the depths of his mind, Nocturna, his dark god, commanding him.
"Retreat, my champion."
The master hesitated, his pride warring with the instinct to survive. But as the wolves prepared for another attack, he knew he could not win this battle. With a snarl of frustration, he shifted quickly to the shadows, moving from one dark corner to the next, traversing miles in mere moments, his speed unmatched by any creature. He fled, the pain and anger boiling inside him, until he found a place far from the battlefield, a safe haven where he could collapse into the shadows. His body, battered and torn, refused to move further. He lay there, defeated and enraged, the realization of his own vulnerability gnawing at him. The master had never known defeat, not like this. The thought of those beasts, those werewolves, besting him was a wound to his pride deeper than any physical pain. He was the master, the harbinger of death, and yet he had been forced to flee. As he lay in the darkness, the taste of his own defeat bitter in his mouth, the master swore vengeance. This was not over. He would return stronger than before, and when he did, he would destroy those who had dared to challenge him. He would make them suffer, just as they had made him suffer. And then, when the time was right, he would unleash his fury upon the world once more. The birth of Azreal. As the master lay in the shadows, nursing his wounds and seething with anger, a voice commanded him from the depths of his mind. It was Nocturna, the dark god who had made him what he was, speaking with authority and power.
"My champion, you cannot defeat the Lycan. They are gifted with a power that counters yours."
The master's pride flared at these words. Nocturna, I must defeat them. What good am I as a champion if I cannot overcome two mere animals? I must destroy them. Nocturna's voice was patient, yet firm.
"As an elder, you possess a greater weapon than brute strength, the power to create more of your kind."
The master scoffed, his voice bitter. No number of elders could defeat them. They are too fast, too strong. But Nocturna's tone remained unshaken.
"You will only need one. When you have fed and regained your strength, I will guide you to your greatest weapon. These lands hold strange creatures, some ancient, others long forgotten. One in particular, perhaps the last of its kind, is of great interest to us."
A slow, wicked smile spread across the master's face as he felt his faith in Nocturna's power and wisdom rekindle a new passion for destruction within him. He would not be defeated. He would rise again, stronger than ever, and exact his vengeance. Driven by this renewed purpose, the master quickly moved to a small, unsuspecting town nestled in the icy reaches of the land. There, he unleashed his fury, killing with a sadistic pleasure that surpassed even his previous bloodlust. Each life he took was a tribute to his own power, a retribution for the defeat he had suffered. The town fell silent under his wrath, its inhabitants reduced to lifeless husks, their blood feeding his dark thirst. Once sated, the master felt a guiding presence within him, Nocturna's hand, leading him far from the scene of his carnage. He followed this invisible pull, traveling many miles into the frozen hills where no mortal dared tread. The winds were harsh, cold enough to freeze a living man instantly, but the master moved through them effortlessly, his shadowy form making light work of the treacherous terrain. At last, he arrived at a large foreboding cave, its entrance hidden among the jagged cliffs. The master sensed something within, something ancient and powerful, a presence that dwarfed even his own formidable strength. He slipped inside, melding with the shadows as he ventured deeper into the cave's icy depths. There, at the heart of the cave, lay a giant man, a being so large that even the master felt a rare sense of awe. The giant's chest rose and fell with each slow, deep breath, his enormous form seemingly carved from the very mountains themselves. He was a relic of a forgotten age, a creature of myth and legend, now slumbering in this frozen tomb. The voice of Nocturna echoed within the master's mind, urging him onward.
You must drain this creature of its blood.
The master hesitated, uncharacteristically doubtful. He had drained entire villages dry of their lifeblood, but this creature, this giant, was like nothing he had ever encountered. Could he truly drain such a being? But he trusted in Nocturna's guidance. Like a bat, attaching itself to cattle, the master moved silently to the giant's side and began to drink. His fangs pierced the giant's thick skin, and he drank deeply, the ancient blood flooding his senses with power. The giant remained in his deep slumber, oblivious to the dark force, siphoning his life force. Days passed as the master drank, his hunger seemingly insatiable, yet the giant never stirred. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the master had drunk his fill. He pulled away, his body thrumming with the ancient power he had consumed, but Nocturna's command was not yet finished.
Now feed the creature your own blood,
the dark god instructed.
You will need to give it much.
The master, though drained himself, bit into his own wrist, the dark blood flowing from the wound. He pressed it to the giant's mouth, allowing the thick, potent blood to trickle down the giant's throat. The creature's lips parted instinctively, accepting the offering. The master continued to feed the giant his own essence until he could give no more, his body weakening with each drop that left him. Exhausted, the master stepped back, knowing to wait. Days passed, and still he waited, his eyes never leaving the slumbering giant. The cave was silent, but for the slow, rhythmic breathing of the creature, and then, at last, the giant began to stir. The giant's skin darkened, taking on an ancient, leathery texture, as if the very age of the world itself was imprinted upon him. His eyes, once closed in sleep, snapped open, glowing with a fierce, unnatural light. The master watched in awe as the creature's transformation began. From the giant's back, two massive wings unfurled, black as night and powerful, their span dwarfing the cavern's walls. The creature's body, once that of a slumbering man, now stood tall and monstrous, towering over the master. He was no longer merely a giant. He was something far more terrifying, a fusion of ancient power and vampiric blood, a new being born of darkness. The master stepped forward, Azreal, a wicked grin spreading across his face as he gazed up at his creation.
Azreal,
he whispered, the name rolling off his tongue like a dark promise. Together, we shall seek revenge on those animals. Let them try to best you, my creation. Azreal, once a giant of the frozen lands, now stood as a terrifying hybrid, a creature of legends and myths combined. His presence radiated raw, untamed power, a force that even the master could barely comprehend. He flexed his new wings, the cavern shuddering with the force of his movement. Azreal's eyes locked onto the master, a hunger burning within them, a desire for battle that matched his creator's own. The master could sense it. Their bond, forged in blood and darkness, was unbreakable. Together, they would bring ruin to those who had dared to defy them. As the master looked upon his creation, his faith in Nocturna was reaffirmed. He had been given the ultimate weapon, a beast of unparalleled strength and savagery. The werewolves who had bested him would soon learn the true meaning of terror. Azreal let out a deafening roar, the sound echoing through the cavern and out into the frozen wastelands. His wings stretched wide, casting a shadow that consumed the entire cave. The hunger for battle, for destruction, coursed through him, and the master knew that soon, very soon, they would unleash their fury upon the world. The chapter ended with Azreal, reborn in darkness, his eyes burning with a thirst for battle. The world would tremble before them, and the blood of their enemies would flow like rivers. The time for revenge had come. The wrath of Azreal. As Bjorn arrived at the fortress, his heart sank at the sight that awaited him. The courtyard, once filled with the laughter and strength of his kin, was now a graveyard. The bodies of his fellow warriors lay scattered across the ground, their blood staining the stones. His mind reeled, unable to comprehend the devastation. The brothers, Sigmund and Sinfjotli, were busy clearing the aftermath of the massacre, their faces grim and worn from battle. Other warriors had arrived as well, having heard the news of the Jarl's death. They came to pay their respects, to honor the fallen Jarl and the warriors who had given their lives in defense of the fortress. The air was thick with sorrow and a sense of profound loss. The brothers, now back in their human forms, approached Bjorn and the gathered warriors. Sigmund spoke first, his voice heavy with the weight of what had transpired. "We defeated the creature responsible for this," he said, his eyes scanning the faces of those around him. "But it fled, injured. We were unable to finish it off." Sinfjotli added, "This creature is unlike anything we have faced before. It is powerful, but it can be stopped. We will help rebuild this fortress, and we will defend it with our lives." Time passed, and while the fortress had not fully recovered from the attack, more warriors arrived daily, flocking to its gates to aid in the rebuilding and to pay their respects to the fallen. The once thriving stronghold was now a somber place, its halls echoing with the memories of those who had been lost. As night fell, the fortress was blanketed in an uneasy silence, a silence that was soon broken by a familiar shadow that watched from above. The master, seething with hatred, hovered over the fortress like a dark cloud. His mind was consumed with a singular desire, the utter destruction of this place and the deaths of the brothers who had bested him. With a savage determination, the master swooped down upon the fortress, descending like a nightmare upon the guards who patrolled the walls. He moved with terrifying speed, his attacks precise and brutal. The alarm was raised, and warriors rushed from their quarters, weapons in hand, ready to defend their home and their kin. Bjorn, seeing the master once more, felt a cold dread wash over him. "He's back!" he screamed, his voice echoing through the fortress. The brothers, hearing Bjorn's cry, quickly donned their pelts and transformed into the savage werewolves. They raced toward the master, their eyes blazing with fury and their fangs bared, ready to once again face the creature that had brought such devastation. The master, wiping the blood from his lips, turned to face the two werewolves. An evil smile played on his bloodied lips as he relished the prospect of battle. "This time will be different," he hissed. And then, with a voice that seemed to shake the very foundations of the fortress, the master screamed a name: Azreal. A massive gust of wind tore through the fortress, sending men and objects flying, and the ground itself seemed to tremble as Azreal descended from the sky. The creature was a towering figure, his wings blocking out the moonlight, his presence radiating pure malice. Even the two brothers, fierce and battle-hardened as they were, stopped in their tracks at the sight of this terrifying monster. Azreal stood before them, dwarfing the fortress and everything within it. The master, dripping with disdain for the wolves, screamed once more, "Destroy them!" Azreal moved with terrifying speed for a creature of his size, his massive hand reaching out to grab one of the brothers, but the werewolves, agile and quick, dodged the attack, their instincts guiding them as they prepared for the fight of their lives. The battle that ensued was nothing short of a massacre. Azreal, with his immense strength and unrelenting power, tore through the brothers with ease. Sigmund and Sinfiotli fought valiantly, their claws and fangs flashing in the moonlight as they tried to strike at the giant. But Azreal was too strong, too fast. His every move was calculated, his every strike lethal. Sigmund, the elder brother, was the first to fall. Azreal's massive hand slammed into him with the force of a mountain, sending him crashing into the fortress walls. He lay there, broken and lifeless, his blood pooling around him. Sinfiotli, wounded and exhausted, continued to fight, but the outcome was inevitable. Azreal caught him with a crushing blow, sending him sprawling to the ground. The younger brother, barely able to move, looked up at the monstrous creature towering over him, his eyes filled with a mix of defiance and despair. At that moment, the master lunged at him, his fangs sinking into Sinfiotli's neck. The werewolf struggled, but he was too weak, too drained. The master drank deeply, savouring the taste of his blood as he drained the last of Sinfiotli's life force. The master leaned in close, his voice a cold whisper. "I told you I would have you on the menu. Now I'll take what power you have." With the death of the brothers, the fortress fell. Azreal and the master, a pair of unmatched horrors, laid waste to everything in their path. The once proud stronghold was reduced to rubble, its defenders slain, its halls echoing with the screams of the dying. Nothing was left but death and destruction, the air thick with the scent of blood and fire. But the master's thirst for revenge, for destruction, was far from sated. With Azreal at his side, he began a reign of terror that spread across the northern lands. Towns, villages and clans all fell before their might. No amount of bloodshed could quench the master's hunger. No amount of death could satisfy his desire for power. The northern lands, once a place of strength and honor, were transformed into a wasteland of corpses and ash. The name of the master and his creation, Azreal, became synonymous with fear and despair. Those who survived the onslaught spoke in hushed tones of the creatures that had brought such devastation, but no one dared stand against them. The master and Azreal, a duo of destruction, moved from one place to the next, leaving nothing but ruin in their wake. The world had never seen such a force of darkness, and it seemed that nothing could stop them. But as the blood of countless lives flowed at their feet, the master's mind was consumed with thoughts of the future. He had destroyed those who had defied him, but his ambition knew no bounds. There were more lands to conquer, more enemies to crush, and with Azreal at his side, there was nothing he could not achieve. The chapter ended with the master and Azreal standing amidst the ruins of yet another village. the flames of their destruction lighting up the night sky. The Master smiled, his eyes gleaming with the promise of more bloodshed to come. The world was theirs for the taking, and they would not stop until every last corner of it was drenched in blood. The Cave of Shadows. As the Master sat amidst the ruins of the northern lands, reveling in the destruction he had wrought, a voice boomed before him, a voice that shook the very earth beneath his feet. It was Nocturna, the god of the elders, speaking to him with a tone of both praise and command.
Well done, my champion.
Nocturna's voice echoed through the night.
You have crushed those who dared to challenge you, drained this land of any and all life. But now is the time for stealth. I will need you and Azreal when the final war comes, for there are powerful beings who could oppose us. Until we build up enough strength, you must become a shadow, a spectre of the night.
The Master's satisfaction turned to unease as Nocturna continued.
Azreal can no longer follow you. He will join me in the realm of darkness.
Before the Master could protest, Azreal began to dissolve into shadow, his massive form disintegrating into the night. The creature that had fought alongside him, that had been his weapon of destruction, was gone, pulled into the dark abyss that was Nocturna's realm. The Master felt a void where Azreal's presence had been, and an uncontrollable rage began to boil within him. I am not sated, he snarled. I need to kill more. I must kill them all.
No.
Nocturna's voice was absolute, the power in his words dwarfing anything the Master had ever felt.
For now, you must wait. You shall become one with the shadows, and when I have need of you, I will call. Until then, you must no longer draw attention to yourself. You must become the very shadow you dwell in.
The Master's anger surged, his need for blood and violence overwhelming his senses. I will not, he screamed, his voice a roar of defiance. I must kill. It is my nature. But Nocturna's response was a force of unimaginable power, crushing the Master's will with a presence that was all-encompassing.
You are an instrument of my will, nothing more. Should you defy me, I will destroy you.
The Master, who had thought himself invincible, felt a fear creep into his heart for the first time. He had never encountered a power like this, a force that could bend him to its will so effortlessly.
Now,
Nocturna continued, his tone brooking no argument.
You will be confined to the Cave of Shadows. Should I have need of your special abilities, my son will come for you. Aid us well, my champion.
With those final words, the Master felt himself being drawn away, his body dissolving into the darkness, transported to a place few could reach, a place known only in whispers, the Cave of Shadows. The cave was a place of damp, silent dread, hidden deep within the earth, barely reachable by mortal men. Inside the cave, the Master's rage and hunger grew. He was a creature born to kill, and now confined to this dark prison, his desires festered and rotted, turning him into something more parasitic, more dangerous than he had ever been before. He fed on his anger, on the memories of battles fought and enemies slain, and over the years, his powers grew in ways no other elder could match. From time to time, Nocturna would call upon the Master, summoning him to deal with threats that no other elder could handle. Each time, the Master would be unleashed upon the world, his fury tearing through whatever obstacles stood in his path. And each time, after the deed was done, he was returned to his cave, too dangerous to remain in the world of men. The years passed, and the Master's power continued to grow. He drained powerful creatures of their life force, absorbing their strengths, their abilities. It was said that he became so powerful that he was able to defeat even the Lycans single-handedly with the powers he had accumulated over the centuries. Of all the elders, The Master became the most feared. His name was whispered in terror, a name that was rarely spoken, for to invoke it was to invite death itself. Only when something needed doing that no other elder could achieve did they dare call upon the Master. The Cave of Shadows still stands today, a place of darkness and silence, where no light dares to enter. Inside the Master waits, his power contained, but never fully tamed. He is a being of pure destruction, a force that even Nocturna handles with caution. And so, the legend of the Master endures, a tale of blood and darkness that continues to haunt the world. The end has not yet come, for as long as the Master exists, the threat of his return looms over all. The end